Questions of Doom. Hello, and welcome back to another Questions of Doom. In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address, as displayed on the YouTube channel homepage, but as you'll also see at the end of this video. In answering these questions by video, it is my fond hope that the answer is not only useful to the person or persons who have asked the question, but also anyone else out there who may be wondering the same thing. And today's question is one that I know many people out there are wondering about. Many people come at some point in their lives to query, and whether I've heard this question just floating about me in the ether, whether people ask me in person, which they do from time to time, or whether I have received the occasional email, not explicitly a question of doom, but nonetheless the occasional email asking about this. I wanted to answer this question to the best of my ability on video, so I can at least point to it in the future, and also so that it's a helpful reference for people who do come across this question in the future. I am, of course, as you know from the title of the video, talking about the pronunciation of a central figure in British history, an iconic female leader, an icon of resistance and resilience against oppression, against the Roman Empire. I am talking, of course, of Boudica, or Boadicea. Depends on how you want to pronounce it, right? Or does it? You see, this really came to a head, in my head at least, the other day when I attended an evening choir concert. A friend of mine was performing on stage as part of a choir. Me and Mrs. Soup went along, and it was a lovely evening, but the compere for the evening couldn't resist at one point talking about, it's nice to hear the word or the name Boadicea pronounced correctly in that song. And that kind of irritated me, because Boadicea is not technically the right way to say the name, although it is kind of. And this is why I thought this video is a good idea. We can come at this and tackle this and hopefully come out at the end with well, actually, probably no more understanding than we have at the beginning, but at least you'll know the reasons. So, Boudica, Boadicea, where does the name come from? Well, she is mentioned by Tacitus initially in his history of the Romans in Britain, when he's sort of chronicling how the Romans came to be in Britain and how they sort of interacted with the local people. He mentions her by name as this leader who led a revolt, famously, infamously, burned down a couple of Roman cities, became an icon for Britishness ever since. And he spells her name Boudicca, two C's in that spelling, not one. And this is important because, you see, for Romans and Roman Latin, there was no soft C. There was only the K sound. So he's almost emphasizing the K-ness of the word, Boudica, Boudica. And therefore it's highly likely that that is how the name should be pronounced. Now we'll come back to the fact that this is a biased author in a bit. We'll come back to the fact that this is a Latinized version of a native name in just a moment. But nonetheless, that's where it comes from, and that's why I certainly believe that it should be Boudica. And also, actually, the Iceni tribe, as many people call it, Boadicea, the Iceni tribe, where she came from, is actually the Iceni tribe, or the Iceni tribe. You can muck about with the vowels if you want to, but the K is important. So I think it's Boudica and the Iceni, or the Iceni. Now, things did legitimately change, though, over time. So as Latin evolved, especially through the medieval period, especially in this sort of the ecclesiastical context, and especially in continental Europe, there were fudges in terms of how the pronunciation would be affected by the vowels that surrounded the consonant C. And so, bit by bit, we had a soft C, a ch noise, and a k noise added to Latin. And people started to accept these as just the way that Latin was spoke. But spoke in, as I say, a medieval context. It was very much an addition to the language, and it was very much a fashion. Languages change, and especially in France, these pronunciations came about. And this is why today we say words like Caesar, Cicero, and yet curiously we also say Scipio, another famous Roman. So actually, there is a reason. There's a reason for the soft C coming into Latin, but it's not original. And actually, words like Caesar were originally Kaiser. The Germanic, actually, funnily enough, still has that correctly. Cicero, Cicero, and Scipio, well, Scipio. And it's funny though, actually, that we don't say Scipio, Scipio. So there are legitimate reasons for why the C became soft, but my point is this is not the original pronunciation. Now, it also actually entered English as a sort of obviously through various means, but in particular, for example, the Norman invasion, so on and so forth, as a sort of like a fashionable thing to aim for, to be more continental Latin, as it were, especially if you're a learned person. And so it became the posh way of saying, or the correct way of saying Latin. And this is why by the 19th century, by the time we get to the Victorian period, people are absolutely bolted down with Boudica, the Iceni tribe, Caesar, Cicero, this kind of thing. And so in that sense, there is a very good argument that that is how it should be said. Mr. Soup. It should be Boudica, it should be Iceni, it should be Caesar. And in many respects, you're absolutely right. I, for example, I'm never going to start calling Caesar, Julius Caesar. It just sounds weird, especially in a post-20th century context. There were reasons why people in Britain avoid saying Kaiser, and why actually, especially in and around the Second World War, the idea of a Kaiser successfully invading Britain was less than palatable. So actually, you can make an argument that the soft C is a legitimate way to pronounce Boudica. It should be Boudicca, and this is the lineage, and this is the reason why. But it's also, in my opinion, incorrect, and actually in many other people's opinion as well. And there has been a shift in recent years towards pronouncing these words using the original pronunciation. For example, the central part of a Roman fort, what many people for many years called the Principia, is increasingly being referred to as the Principia, for example. We are referring to these things as the Romans would have, increasingly. So you could argue that's just another fashion shift, another linguistic shift, but I would say it's a linguistic rediscovery, if you see what I mean. And in that sense, I think that's a strong argument for the hard C, for the K sound. Now, some people will say, but you're forgetting that this word came into Latin from another language, from the sort of the Brythonic dialects of Britain that the Romans encountered when they came to this island. And you're right, you're absolutely correct. And some of those people will even go further and they'll say, well, words like Celtic are pronounced with a soft C, and that's a whole other video, by the way. But that depends on lots of other things. But actually, I would say that in some respects, it is precisely because these words have come into and they've been Latinized by the author that we can rely on the hard C, the K sound, as in Celtic, for example. And actually, there's not only is it based on the fact that they were hearing Boudica and therefore writing double C, emphasizing the K-ness, but also actually, if we look at the daughters of the Brythonic dialects, for example, Welsh, the main inheritor of the Celtic language block on this island, there's no soft C in Welsh either. In fact, the word for Welsh, Cymraeg, or Wales, Cymru, or Welsh people, Cymro, it's spelt Cymru, for example, Wales, Cymru, but it's it's pronounced Cymru. It's not a soft, it's not Sumri, it's a summary. So in summary, no, it's not Sumri, it's Cymru. And I think that's another pointer to the fact that these words were being said with a hard K. The Romans heard them with a hard K, so they doubled the C in Boudica, for example, and that's how you should probably try to pronounce it in the future. Now, at this point, maybe you're convinced. Maybe you're saying, "Ah, yes, the soft C," or maybe you are going to just follow that star, follow the pronunciation that you're most familiar with until your dying day. I mean, that's fine, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But there's one final thought that occurs to me, and that is arbitrary primitivism. The way that people in different situations refer to, in particular, the ancient Celticness of Britain as being either something which is really primitive and basic and sort of crucial to the Britishness of being from this island, but also in other instances they'll refer to it in a kind of a very familiar way, a kind of Celtic next door kind of way. There's a sort of there's at least two different heads that people have on their shoulders when they think about the people who the Romans met when they came to Britain, the Britons, in fact. I would argue that by familiarising and making overly familiar their pronunciations, oh yes, Boudicca, Iceni, Caesar, this kind of thing, we are domesticating, as it were, that identity. We're domesticating that history. We are bringing it into that, the Celt next door kind of thing. They pronounce words roughly the way we think they should be pronounced, didn't they? Whereas, to be honest, I think the best way to think about the past in general, really, is to accept that it was different. And the Britons of Britain, the Celtic people who the Romans bumped into here, did in fact have a language that was not English, did in fact have a language that had not been through the medieval Latin mutation that occurred, and did in fact have a language that sounded the way that the Romans kind of thought it sounded when they wrote down those words 2,000 years ago, or the better part of 2,000 years ago. I suppose what I'm saying is it's interesting how people seem to want their cake and eat it when it comes to the Celts and to the Britons in Britain. And they want to feel that there's some sort of primitive, sort of, cultural imperative behind the Celts. But they don't want necessarily them to be too different from us today, from how we see the world today and how we see, for example, the letter C. And I think there's just there's a thought there. There's an exercise that maybe we can do to interrogate how we are considering our ancient ancestors in that sense. But in a nutshell, in summary, not Cymru, in summary, in summary, I suppose the simple fact of the matter is you can pronounce Boudica, Boudicca, in both ways. You can say Iceni and Iceni. You can say Caesar and Kaiser if you really want to raise some eyebrows. You can even say Cicero if you really want to get some squiffy looks from people. You can do that, but I suppose my top tip for you would be to choose one and run with it. Don't mix and match. So some people they say Boudica and Iceni, because Iceni is just a bit too weird for them to say Iceni. Or they say Boudicca and the Iceni. No, they never say that. No one ever says Boudicca and the Iceni. But my point is they often mix and match how they say the C when it comes to these words. So I would my tip, if nothing else, I would say pick one and run with it. So just always say one or t'other if you can. But then again, as I say, it's all up in the air. It's all up for grabs, in so much as Caesar, in Britain at least, is always going to be Caesar, not Kaiser. Anyway, guys, that's the first question of doom of the year. Not technically a formal question that I've been sent, but one that just keeps on being sent my way in various forms. So this is like an FAQ question of doom, I suppose. And this is the first video of the new year. Now, there will be a new year video coming very soon, probably later on this week, in fact. But nonetheless, until then, Happy New Year. And please do comment and discuss below if you have any further thoughts, especially on the specifics, for example, of the relationship between the soft C and the vowels that surround it in medieval Latin. I didn't go into that in detail, so if you want to lay that out, please do lay it out in the comments below. But I just wanted to get this off my chest. It's been bothering me for a long time, especially as someone whose name is Mark with a C, M-A-R-C. I understand the value of the hard C, of the K sound, and I just figured I'd put this in a video, and if it ever comes up again in the future, I can just point to this video. Look at that video, take a look, and people will at least know the complexity of the topic at hand. As ever, guys, until next time, do take care. Bye bye. Just in case they blow off.
You're all right.
Yes.
Come on.